You know, there's a brilliant community spirit around
We've
here.
got a good
and there always has
cross-section
been.
of shops round Lee Village,
Top of Lee Village.
My childhood memories, we had some happy times. Just sometimes you get some youths that don't really know how to conduct themselves.
When we were growing up around, there was a lot of burglars about, a lot of thieves about, a lot of drug addicts about, a lot of good people about, a lot of
We
crime.
haven't really got a crime problem as such. I wouldn't say it's any better or worse than probably anywhere else in the country, really.
The problem is at the moment, we're in such a hard...
This is now a third and fourth generation estate. We tend to think about, you know, they're still new, Lee Hall and Lee Village and Charlotte, but they're not new, they've been there for 3 years.
But how can you get
regenerate this place?
Reawakening Lee Village is a Heritage Lottery funded project led by Real Access in partnership with QSR Squared Solutions, working with local residents to bring the largely forgotten history of Lee Village in Birmingham back to life. But if you haven't heard of Lee Village, then don't worry, not many people have. Even in 1932, a reporter from the Birmingham Mail described it as probably the loneliest, most rural and least known spot in Birmingham. Although the history of the village can be traced back to 1275, it became subsumed under the suburban growth of Birmingham in the 1930s and the main post-war estate building project that was the Lee Hall estate. There are now no signs for Lee Village and no markers of its rich history.
The project came about following conversations with some local residents, and they were concerned that Lee Village had been forgotten. It had been overtaken by Kitts Green, and really it had sort of lost its place in Birmingham. There aren't any signs for Lee Village. There's no clear identity for it, and so they were looking for ways to try and re-establish that idea, and I think with the hope that that would then bring local people together again.
This all started with an email that I received from a resident who said, I'm really fed up with the fact that the identity of Lee Village has got completely taken over by the identity of Kitts Green. We don't even have a sign anymore other than the street sign of Lee Village itself to signify that this was an entity in its own right. He then went on to take me through the history of the village, going back to medieval times, and saying, look, we really need to acknowledge the fact that this had an identity of its own. Basically what he was after was just to put some signage up, but out of that grew this rather exciting project where we said, let's look at that history that goes back several hundred years. Let's start to uncover the stories. Let's start to commemorate some of those stories that take place. And if you look at the history of Lee Village over that several hundred year period, it's a real sort of microcosm of the history of Birmingham. So you start with a rural village out on one of the roads leading out towards London, and then you get into the story of the Industrial Revolution, with the growth of industry, the coming of the railway, right up to the great interwar and post-war housing projects that took place in the city when people moved out of the slums and into a better quality of life on the edges of Birmingham. So it was a fascinating multi-layered story, and we just thought, here's an opportunity to really bring that to life, and also to get local people involved in sharing those stories, celebrating their heritage, and getting involved in a conversation about their future of the neighbourhood as well.
Basically, Lee Village was, and Reawakening Lee Village started off, and I thought, oh, Lee Village is still mentioned, but it's still not identified as Lee Village. And the thing is, if you come from outside of the area, it's categorised as being Kitts Green, because Kitts Green is on the map. You know, Lee Village was there way before Kitts Green, but it's sort of like an identity that's been lost. Now, of course, through this flyer, I got in touch with John Cotton, local Labour councillor, and he sort of like took it to Real Access, and then just sort of like blew up from there.
Here at Real Access, we became very interested at the potential of what the history was here, really, and some of the stories, and actually looking at the identity of a place that has actually almost fallen to the wayside in terms of its name and its culture and its heritage. So that's where it began, and from that we worked very hard to create a project idea with Roger.
George Chiswell lived at Church Lane. It's right. And I went to the junior school, that was Whittington Oval.
Whittington Oval, yes.
With a gas mask over my shoulder when war started.
Okay.
And I stayed in my building trade all my life.
Yes.
Yes, enjoyed
so you have
it.
seen and built the change.
That's right, we've seen the estates being built, and when you go round Birmingham, have a look what work you have done, and the buildings are still standing. It's it brings back memories, but there's a hell of a lot which have been knocked down.
Lee Village has a history that goes back to the 12th century, and the area around Lee Village goes back even further than that. So Mackadown Lane, for example, Mackadown is referred to in the Domesday Book as Mac's Farm. So this area has a very long and rich history, but no one's ever really been able to pinpoint where Lee Village is or what consists of Lee Village.
Well, this is a fascinating question.
Well, there's the road signs at the top, both ends of the road and in the middle.
You got your railway, Lee Hall, that's the railway line. You got Lee Hall Road.
And the old Lee Hall site focused around the railway station.
Muirfield, Dressel Lane is down the bottom here. So all that, Kish Green Road, that's the main road. There's the island, and that's it.
There are many different shapes you can give to Lee Village, and I think it's about the community actually defines its own boundaries to an extent. Lee Village's shape has changed over many years, starting from the very core of Lee Village itself, around where the Lee Tavern and the old Lee Hall were, and then growing as we've seen the growth of settlement here, and particularly the creation of the Lee Hall estate from the 1930s onwards.
Local resident George Chiswell took us out on a walking tour to show us his view of where Lee Village begins and ends.
You could bypass straight the way through from Folliott Road into Lee Hall. Now here's the railway which was cut through.
Near Lee Hall station stood the original Lee Hall. It sat in an estate of 37 acres. After it was demolished, the stones marking the entrance to Lee Hall stood alone for many years.
The stone piers
used to be around here.
Used to be approximately here. I can remember vaguely the walls. There was one left standing, but since I've erected the fence, it's been demolished. It was quite about as high as the fence, 6 foot high.
Yes.
Before it was demolished in 1937, it was described as being of moderate size, with extensive servants' quarters and no less than 11 bedrooms.
Well, apparently they must have done some digging here.
A lot of digging.
Yes, because the hall apparently spread over this area, didn't it?
Yeah.
Initially, we had like a celebratory opening to the project here at the pump, which we had over 50 local residents in, and from that we started collecting stories from them, and these stories were on postcards that were generated, and people could write their kind of histories and their memories of Lee Village, and we put that into, or we started to put that into an archive, and that helped us to generate stories that could be used for a film, which is something that we were interested in.
The history of Lee Village is quite fascinating, and we feel that it's really being lost. The area was first settled in 1275, which many people don't know. It had a period as an estate with Lee Hall at its heart, and then as a post-war estate to replace back-to-back. Today is all about launching the project and a chance for you to find out more, ask questions, tell us a story, and find out how to get involved.
My money was spent at Musson's shop in Lee Village when we used to go.
That famous Musson's sweet shop.
The old school used to go there, and he used to watch you. And there was a wall at the front. You couldn't sit on the wall. You had to go into the entrance, and we used to line up for the sweets, and he used to serve us. And he was very meticulous with the weight. He'd drop one on, and you think, oh, I'm going to get one extra of it. But he never did, you know. He weighed them meticulously. And we had our quarter of sweets, and we used to share them, you know, humbugs and stuff like that. And my friends, we used to share, and we couldn't eat these sweets in school.
Yes.
The teachers, they was very, very strict but fair. This was the front entrance to the shop. Where this tree must be a few years old now, 50 years old or so. And the other side entrance was along where the family used to use to go into the shop. As I say, you could get all types of sweets from here. Gobstoppers, trout, trout's nice sweet. And there was a load wall all the way along the front, yes. And
a no-go area for you as a child?
No, we wouldn't let us sit on the wall. We had to be disciplined. If so, the reports used to go back to the headmaster, Mr. Cowley, at school. But that's the site of Musson's shop. This is the school. This was the back entrance. But this entrance here, as I say, Shuttleton Road, and that was the only entrance which he kept open.
Lee Village is part of one of the youngest cities in the UK, and also part of the Hodge Hill district, which has a younger population profile than the city as a whole, with over 1/4 of the population in Hodge Hill aged below 15. Lee Village has always been home to many children.
We had stuff to do when we was younger, and we used to go over the big field and play football, tracking and stuff. Then as I got to about, I think it was like 13, 14, Murfield closed, so there was nowhere for us to go, and really we didn't have nothing to do. It was boring, you know, the crime rate was going up because, you know, all we had was mischief to get up to, really.
We haven't really got a crime problem as such. I wouldn't say it's any better or worse than probably anywhere else in the country, really. I think it was fairly bad, but only from an antisocial behaviour.
It's not too bad now, actually, because I say everything's quietened down a lot.
One of the main problems is I think it's just a lack of pride. It's one of those. I think because there's a lot of council tenants and rented properties around here, you can normally tell the difference between the rented ones and the ones that are owned.
There was a van ran raided the shop, and they got away with a couple of TVs and the videos and that. So, you know, I mean, but that was say around about in the 70s, maybe, because it was quite rough then, you know.
We also advertised for local people to get involved in script writing workshops, and so we had like a number of those over the winter months, in which we created a number of small script ideas that could turn into actual scripts themselves. We also worked with Birmingham City Council on something called Arts on the Move, in which we had the mobile arts unit around Lee Village, in which we engaged directly with young people within the community to get their ideas about like a story or maybe a script. and we created a steering group, and we started kind of like talking to the local residents about how to take this forward, and from that we developed the project, which has involved numerous things, from the creation of an archive to, from our point of view, being an audio-visual sort of like company, creating a number of films that actually celebrated and looked into the history of Lee Village. That was very important, that, you know, we wanted to give the local residents a full experience of filmmaking, because like here at Real Access we you know, we want to facilitate not only their ideas, but give them opportunities to get really hands-on with kind of using the cameras, editing, sound equipment, you know, whatever they're interested in. So we had local people like involved in the acting part of it. So in Shelter, which is a film set during the time of the war, we had local, so like actually local people from at Divas, which is a local community group, and local residents who got involved playing roles within the film.
A state of war would exist between us. I have to tell you now that no such undertaking has been received, and that consequently this country is at war with Germany.
You on your own? I'm not going to hurt you. Sit down!
Once we had the final Reawaken Lee Village Festival in May, we did a number of showings of the films and some of the material that we created, and we had over 50 people, 75 people even, actually come and see the films over the course of the day, and every one of them thought that the films were fantastic. So I mean, like, that's a really good indictment of the work that we've done.
Lee Village grew out of Lee Hall and farm, so what is now residential areas used to be vast farmland. The Sidney Nolan Trust have been involved in the project, delivering pottery workshops to the community, but as they are based on a farm on the borders of Wales, Real Access thought it would be great to let people involved in the project experience what life in Lee Village may have been like when it was farmland. There they toured the farm and were taught about day-to-day living and working on a farm. They also had a chance to spin their own pot.
It's a bit of the pottery. I felt it really enjoyable, that was.
There was, you know, the green, the top of the road, the green, the playing fields. They knocked the old pub down, which was falling down anyway. The green, tavern on the green, they've knocked that down. That was roughly about 10 years ago.
When I moved around here, it was the same year that they knocked it down, but I heard that was the local like boozer, and yeah, like there's a lot of history that went on there.
It was a lovely old building. It was knocked down quite a few years ago now to have houses built on it, but it was over where there's part of the old wall from the original Lee Hall is still standing there, but the pub's gone, unfortunately.
A lot of old folks used to meet for the Dominoes, and, you know, no trouble in there ever. And felt safe. Don't feel safe up there now.
And cleaned that all up, and they put little trees and shrubs all round the edge, round the barrier. Have you seen it? All round the edge of the green, and put a children's play centre in the middle. And a ballpark as well.
Once the archive was collated, the project reached a final celebratory point. Real Access wanted to exhibit the stories, films and photos from the projects, at the same time as invigorating the old sense of the Lost Village with traditional art forms such as Morris dancing, maypole dancing and much more.
Today it was brilliant. I mean, my mum came down on that and she really enjoyed it. I mean, it was a really, like, I've seen faces that I haven't seen in ages, and a lot of talent from all around Birmingham. They came down to perform.
The day was a success, with great footfall of more than 200 people.
The history boards are based on some of the work of the archive, in pulling together some of the historical information about the neighbourhood. We will be building and designing them with local people and creating a history trail along the heart of the original Lee Village to really reaffirm and support the ongoing identity of the area.
I think the history boards will be a visible memento of this project, a long-term legacy, if you like, and it will enable all that work that local people have done in sharing their stories, sharing their photographs, doing the research into the archives. It will enable that to be celebrated long-term, and also will trigger other conversations as people are either going around the area or coming into the area. It will access a new and rich fund of stories as well. I think also the history boards will give that visual identity to Lee Village and say, hey, this is not just a road that you pass through. This is a community with a long heritage going back many, many hundreds of years with a whole set of community experiences and stories, and gives that visible Lee Village identity. So it stops being the forgotten village, which I think was where we started this process.
I think it's a really important legacy of the project. I think it's a chance to make sure that the archive isn't just forgotten. There's a constant physical reminder that this information and knowledge is out there. I think it's a visual recognition to local people that they haven't been forgotten, that we do recognise their stories and we do recognise their history, and that we want to support that. And I think that helps build the confidence of the area as well to help it move forwards.
I think the history boards are going to be a wonderful physical legacy for the project, in which local people can walk past and see a little bit of their history, maybe that they haven't come across before, and that has to have an impact on them in terms of understanding where they are in terms of their community and that history and that legacy.
Following the history boards, we'd really like to pick up on the themes emerging from the what next phase of the project. We're asking people how they'd like to see the area develop, and use the research and use the films and use all the activities to prompt discussion amongst the local community about how they'd like to see the area grow and develop.
I think it's got a strong and positive future. One of the things that's really struck me about this project has been the strong sense of community that there is, and a strong sense of well-established community, people who've got roots here that go back several generations, as well as newcomers who've been welcomed to the area as well. One of the things I'm really keen to see grow out of that is a vibrant set of residents' activities. We've had residents groups that have been quite active in the past. I think this gives a new impetus to that process. So we get a strong voice for Lee Village, people who are able to advocate and to paint that strong future for the area.
What I would like to see is a more confident Lee Village. I would like a Lee Village that has a much wider recognition across the city, and I would like to see a Lee Village that really takes control of its heritage much more.
The project has definitely opened people's eyes to the rich history of the area, along with uniting the community through celebrating locality. When the history boards are in place, they will stand as a lasting legacy, not only of the project, but also of the rich social history that has gone before in this community, on the edge of Birmingham, the second biggest city in England.
And I wonder if we'll ever meet again. My love goes with you to your journey's end. I'll always think of you, my newfound friends. I remember having good times all the way from the pump to home. We'd laugh and tears of many things all the way from here to home. May God be with